Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, I refer to my question last week. To have a balance sheet in order in the future, has your government now assessed the economic impact of a 3-degree warmer world to jobs, to coastal and regional communities? And if you have, what are those costs?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Because of the prospect of a warmer globe, that is why we are taking action, Mr Speaker, on climate change as a government. That is why, Mr Speaker, we need no motivation other than the reality that we understand that we know we need to take action on climate change, Mr Speaker, and that's why we took to the last election the plan and the commitment to a 26% reduction in emissions by 2030, Mr Speaker. And those emissions have now reduced by 13.1% on 2005 levels. Now, it's stronger, Mr Speaker, than we've seen by other countries like New Zealand and Canada, and we have a plan and a commitment which we put to the Australian people to meet that target by 2030. Now, Mr Speaker, in relation to the member's question, while the government is taking action to 2030, Mr Speaker, and is making great progress to achieving that target based on our plan, those opposite, Mr Speaker, do not have a 2030 view about emissions reductions that they can actually share with the Australian people. Not one, Mr Speaker.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. I'm going to come to you in a second. Okay. The member for Warringah on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Relevance. The question went to modelling of costs, not to alternate plans.
Yeah, I'll just say there's two issues there. It's very similar to a point of order I've just ruled on. It did have a specific question, but it also referred to the question last week, which, whilst I haven't memorised, I remember you raising a point of order on that, and my point was that had a long preamble. But I do say to the Prime Minister it didn't ask for alternatives either, and I'll call the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I thank you, and I thank the member again for her question. Because the question, Mr Speaker, probably would be better put to the Labor Party, who do not have a 2030 target. They want to talk about 2050 and they can't even tell you what they want to happen by 2030. But let me tell you what we're going to do by 2030 and what we're going to do by 2050,
Members on my
Mr
left.
Speaker. What the government is doing is putting a technology roadmap, which is what you need to ensure that you can reduce emissions not just now, Mr Speaker, but over the next 30 years to address the very issue that the member has raised. Now, those opposite, they have a 2050 target. The member herself may have a 2050 target. She may have a 2050 target. The Labor Party has a 2050 target. But I'm not aware, Mr Speaker, of either the member or the Labor Party having a plan as to how to achieve it. What we have is a plan to reduce emissions not just now, but out in the future. And a key part of our plan, Mr Speaker, is to reduce emissions without putting a tax on Australians, without putting up their electricity prices, and without undermining the industries that so many members on this side of the House, the jobs that they represent in their constituencies right across this country. I'm not going to sell out the jobs of those constituents who depend on those industries. What we're going to do is recognising to take the action on climate change necessary is to get emissions down by the smart process of having a technology plan that sees us reduce emissions into the future. We've got a plan. It's focused on technology. They've got a target, and all it means is higher taxes.